Welcome to this lesson on class reuse and the class designer. After studying this lesson, you should be able to understand the benefits of classes and object-oriented programming, reuse a class, recognize read-only properties, understand the usefulness of the class designer in quickly learning to use a new class. Before we dig into how to build and code classes, let's see if we can get an appreciation for why classes are so powerful and why object-oriented programming is so useful. And I think the best way to do that is to demonstrate one of the most valuable parts of having a class, and that is the ability to reuse that code. So let's create a brand new project. And we'll make that a Windows Forms project, and let's call this class reuse demonstration. All right, and I think what we'd like to do here is we'd like to make use of a class I've created previously, which is an employee class. So it's useful for all kinds of applications that need to deal with manipulating employee records, okay, or at least potentially so, or theoretically so for our purposes of teaching and learning. Okay, so the first thing I want to do is I want to reuse that class so I can add that class, and classes are ordinarily kept in their own individual files. So I can add that as an existing item. So let's add an existing item to this brand new project. And I'll go dig over. A lot of times you keep your classes organized into a collection of related classes called the library. I'm just going to go grab this individually, and let's see, I've got a temporary directory here, and there's my class designer demo project. And in that project, I had created the employee class. So I'm just going to add that here. Okay. All right, and to really see how quickly and easily we can start benefiting from reusing a pre-built class, let's take a look without any digging into the code at how this class works. Now, how do we do that without digging into the code? Well, if you've installed an optional component, which you can add to your Visual Studio, which is the class designer, we can come right-click on that class and say, view the class diagram. And then we can take that class diagram and open it up, and we can change it. Let's have it show the full signature, and let's adjust the width of it so we can see all the elements. And I didn't do anything special to get all this graphical goodness. This is a feature of the class designer, and it reads my definition the same as it would a class that Microsoft's engineers had created. And I can see the fields and the properties and the methods. And let's focus for the moment on the properties and the methods, because since you've been using an object model throughout this term, that's actually kind of familiar. You have been using classes, and maybe without even knowing it, on just about all of the objects and the controls that we've been working with. They are indeed classes. The class is sort of the blueprint from which an instance, a working copy of the object, is created. And one of the things I can see here, if I dig into this, is I can see that there are three methods. There is something called calc vacation, and there is a new, which is a constructor that makes a new version of the class, and this one accepts no parameters. And here is a new version of the class, and that one accepts a number of parameters. So I guess if I wanted to create a new copy and give it specific values, I could use this one and provide all the values. And if I wanted to create a new empty one that has, nothings or nulls or empty strings or default values for all of these parameters, I could use this one. Okay, and I can look at the properties, and most of these are pretty straightforward. So the employee ID, if I come take a look at the properties of it, and I can click on it to look at the actual code, but I can also right-click here and look at the class details. And that's really a useful view because now I can see that the employee ID, it's an integer type and it's public, okay? And first name, last name, pay rate, start date, vacation, all public properties. So if we create the instance of the class, we will be able to directly talk to those. There are some things here that are not public, that are hidden away so they are used internally. And one of them would be the calc vacation method. And if we look back at our class, we see that in the properties, there is a vacation property. But when we look at the details of that class, we find that this is a weird one. It's read-only. So we can read from it, but we can't actually set the value. Well, gosh, that's going to tell us the number of weeks of vacation an employee is entitled to. How come we can't set it? Well, the reason is it's set up for us automatically by a calculation. And there's an internal function here, an internal method called calc vacation, that when we create the object, this calc vacation looks at the value we've provided as the start date, and it looks at the current date, and it applies the business rule. Let's tear into that and see how that all works. So if we go look at our actual code for the calc vacation, it will tell us a little bit about it. Okay, so if we dig into the logic here and see how quickly we're able to see how this works just by looking at the universal markup language, the UML diagram of the class design kind of tells us, and we'll look at that again to see how well that tells us what we can use in this class. So we don't have to have a lot of knowledge about it. As a matter of fact, we don't even need to know the details of this logic, but it's interesting here to see what are the business rules that the programmer who created the class that we're going to use, but we don't have to know the details of. What have they done? Well, they said, oh, look, so this determines vacation based on the years of service. So it gets the date that the employee was originally hired, and it gets the current date, and it converts that into whole years. So if at this point in time, the range is between 0 and 4 using a select case statement, if it's 0 to 4 years, the employee is automatically set up to get 2 weeks of vacation. If they're between 5 and 9 years, they get 3 weeks, and if they've been with the company more than 9 years, so 10 years or more, they're going to get 4 weeks of vacation. And because that's a business rule, we don't want the some programmer to come along and be able to modify that value. That value is going to be set by this calc vacation function. And if we were to search out, and we could do that using the search tool, the find tool here, but I know where it is, so we'll just look at it. When this is created by the constructor that creates the image or the instance, look, it sets directly all the other values that we're allowed to read and write that are readable, writable in their accessibility. But this one is read-only, so vacation is read-only. So it is set through this function that's an internal function. It's, of course, the internal code can change its value, even though the public interface, if we look at the public interface that we made public for the vacation value, we'll find that the vacation value is set to public read-only. Isn't that interesting? So we can have a read-only. And we'll find out more as we dig into these that there are things called getters and setters, or accessors and mutators. And so the getters are what is responsible for returning the internal private variable through the public interface. And the setters allow us to change it if it is a writable as well as a readable property. This one is read-only, and we can see why, because it wants that logic to work. But let's see how quickly we can start using this code. And again, we didn't have to dig into that. We could simply have looked at this interface and said, okay, these are my properties, and if they're public properties, then they don't show a little icon of a lock here. So those are all usable properties that I can access. And notice that my method, the calc vacation, notice that that has a lock on it. So it's used internally. It's not publicly accessible, as opposed to the constructor. So I can publicly, we have to be able to create new copies, new instances of the class, of the object. But the calc vacation is used internally. So we're not really concerned about that. But let's go ahead and see how we might use this. So let's see. Let's adjust our form. I'm not going to use all this screen real estate. We'll do a little looking in on things through the debug window for reporting, and take a shortcut there. And let's come in and let's add a button to it. And let's call this button BTN Go button, and let's change the text to Go. And then we're in our code now. And so the class is over here, but we're not going to do anything with the class itself. We're just using it, or in this case, reusing it, because it's already been created and used on another project. So let's take a look at what we might do with that. So save a little typing. I've got my notes cached over here in the form itself. As soon as the form is instantiated, let's go ahead and create an array. And the array is going to be of this employee type. And because I have already imported this class, it knows about the employee type, just as if it was a built-in native data type. And so we are creating an array, and I'm initializing it by list. And so inside my list, inside the curly brace, are 3 statements of new employee with the parameterized values here. And I've created employee 111, 222, and 333. And so we're using the overloaded constructor, the parameterized constructor, to set specific values. But notice here, again, what's absent is we're not setting the value for the vacation. It's going to calculate that automatically for us, and that's all handled internally. We don't even have to know how, okay? And so once we've got that, let's do some things inside our button routine. And again, to save a little bit of time watching me do boring typing, I've got that cached in my notes. So let's see, we have a for next loop, and we're going from 0 to 2. So we're going to walk down all 3 elements that we created in that array. And we're just going to use Debug Print, and we're going to print out the first name, the last name, and the vacation. So it says, first name of the employee, last name of the employee, receives however much vacation they receive, weeks of vacation based on employment start date, and then it shows the employee start date. Okay, so let's go ahead and see how that works. Oops, I missed a declaration here. Thank you, IntelliSense. And I've also, I trimmed off the next, so I need to close that next loop. There we go. Now it's happy. And let's give it a shot. All right, and I'm going to change that watch window out for the immediate window. And let's see what happens when I tell it to go. And there it is. It's created 3 instances of the employee object in that array. John Beck receives 4 weeks of vacation based on employment start date, and there's the start date. So 4 weeks, so you must have over 9 years of service. And Thomas Smith gets 3 weeks, so must be in the range of 5 years to 9 years of service. And Betty Wang gets 2 weeks of vacation, and so she must be a relative new hire sometime in the last 0 to 4 years. And nifty. So that's all working. So we've seen a little bit about how useful a class is, how powerful it is. Imagine if we had to do all that with raw VB code and individual variables for everything to recreate that. That would be quite a bit of work. And then we've seen how easy it is to use the class designer, which is an optional component that we can add in to really understand our class and how to start using it pretty quickly with a minimum of additional documentation or reading of the code. And we can use that object and that class over and over and over again, because we've designed it in such a way that this would be useful for a lot of different applications. Lots of times you're going to be dealing with an employee object. And so we can start to collect our objects together into our classes together into libraries and start to build pretty powerful applications very, very quickly by reusing our classes and our object-oriented code. This concludes the lesson.